I remember the exact moment I realized my husband thought I was stupid, not just forgetful, not just confused, stupid, exploitable, easy to manipulate. I was standing in our kitchen, the same kitchen where I had made breakfast for him for 43 years, and I heard him on the phone in the next room laughing, actually laughing. He said to whoever was on the other end, and I will never forget these words as long as I live. He said, "My wife has Alzheimer's, and she does not remember anything anymore. This is going to make me so rich you would not believe it. I am going to take everything. She will not even know what hit her." My hands were shaking as I held onto the counter. The morning light was streaming through the window, hitting the coffee pot the same way it had done every single morning for decades, but everything felt different now. Everything felt wrong. You know that feeling when the floor drops out from under you? When reality shifts and you realize the person you trusted most in the world has been planning your destruction? That was the moment for me. That was when I knew, let me back up, because this story, my story, it did not start that morning. It started much earlier, in ways I did not even recognize at first. Little things, small moments that seemed innocent, but were actually the beginning of something much darker. I am 71 years old now, and yes, I do have Alzheimer's disease. I was diagnosed 3 years ago, and I will not lie to you. It has been the hardest thing I have ever faced in my entire life. Harder than losing my parents. Harder than the miscarriages I suffered before my children were finally born. Harder than anything because with Alzheimer's, you lose yourself, piece by piece, memory by memory. Some days I wake up and I do not know where I am. Some days I look at my own reflection and barely recognize the woman staring back at me. Some days I call my daughter by my sister's name, and the hurt in her eyes cuts me deeper than any knife ever could. But here is what people do not understand about Alzheimer's. Here is what my husband certainly did not understand. Having Alzheimer's does not mean you are gone. It does not mean you are stupid. It does not mean you stop feeling, stop thinking, stop understanding when someone is trying to destroy you. My husband's name is Richard. We met when I was 24 years old at a church social. He was handsome, confident, charming. He told me I was beautiful. He told me I was special. He told me he wanted to build a life with me, and I believed him with my whole heart. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony with just our families. I wore my mother's wedding dress, altered to fit me. Richard wore a navy blue suit that made his eyes look like the ocean. When he said his vows, his voice cracked with emotion, and I thought, this is it. This is the man I will grow old with. This is the man who will hold my hand until the very end. We had 3 children together, Michael, Sarah, and Jennifer. I stayed home to raise them while Richard worked his way up in banking. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable. We had a nice house in a good neighborhood. We took vacations every summer. We celebrated birthdays and anniversaries and holidays together. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family, and for many years, I thought we were. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Or maybe they were always this way, and I was just too in love, too trusting, too naive to see it. Richard started working longer hours. He started going on more business trips. He started looking at me differently, with less warmth, less interest, like I was becoming invisible to him. I told myself it was normal. Marriage goes through phases. People get busy. People get distracted. I convinced myself that we just needed to reconnect, to spend more quality time together. I planned date nights that he canceled. I cooked his favorite meals that he barely touched. I tried to talk to him about us, about our relationship, but he would brush me off, tell me I was being dramatic, tell me everything was fine when I knew deep in my bones that everything was not fine at all. Then came the diagnosis, 3 years ago. I had been forgetting things more and more, little things at first, where I put my keys, what day it was, what I was supposed to buy at the grocery store, but then it got worse. I would forget conversations I had just had. I would forget appointments. I would get confused about where I was going. My daughter Sarah was the one who finally convinced me to see a doctor. She came to visit one weekend and found me standing in the garage at 2 a.m, completely disoriented, not knowing how I got there or what I was looking for. The look on her face, the fear and sadness in her eyes, that is what made me realize this was serious. This was not just normal aging. This was something else. The doctor ran tests, cognitive assessments, brain scans, blood work, everything. And then one cold Tuesday afternoon in November, he sat me down in his office with Richard beside me and said the words that changed everything. "Mrs. Patterson, you have early-stage Alzheimer's disease." The room seemed to tilt. My ears were ringing. I could hear the doctor talking, explaining treatment options, support groups, what to expect, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I looked at Richard, expecting to see shock, sadness, maybe even tears. But what I saw on his face was something I could not quite identify at the time, something that made my stomach turn. It was not sadness. It was not fear. It was almost like calculation, like he was processing information and formulating a plan. I reached for his hand and he took it, but his grip was cold, distant, perfunctory. On the drive home, he barely spoke. When I started crying, he did not comfort me. He just stared straight ahead at the road and said, "We will deal with this." And deal with it he did, but not in the way I expected, not in the way a loving husband should. In the months after my diagnosis, Richard became someone I did not recognize. He started controlling everything. He told me I should not be driving anymore, that it was too dangerous. He said I should not be managing our finances anymore, that I might make mistakes. He convinced me to sign power of attorney over to him, telling me it was just a precaution, just to make things easier, just in case I got worse. And I trusted him. God help me. I trusted him. I signed the papers he put in front of me because he was my husband of over 40 years, and I believed he had my best interests at heart. That is when things really started to change. Richard opened new bank accounts in his name only. He sold investments we had made together and put the money where I could not access it. He told me I did not need to worry about money anymore, that he was taking care of everything. When I questioned him, when I asked to see our financial statements, he would get irritated. He would say I was being paranoid. He would say the Alzheimer's was making me confused and suspicious. He would say he was protecting me, protecting us, making sure we would be taken care of. And because I was scared, because I was confused, because some days I really could not remember things clearly, I let him. I let him take control of everything we had built together. My children started noticing something was wrong. Sarah called me one day, concerned. She said, "Mom, why is Dad saying you cannot make any decisions anymore? Why is he saying you are incompetent?" I was shocked. Incompetent. That word hit me like a physical blow. I have Alzheimer's, I told her. I am not incompetent. I still know who I am. I still understand what is happening around me. I still have good days and bad days. I still have thoughts and feelings and opinions. But Richard was telling people, including our own children, that I was essentially gone, that the mother they knew no longer existed, that I was a shell of my former self who needed to be managed and controlled. Jennifer, my youngest, came to visit and found me crying in the bedroom. She sat beside me on the bed, held my hand, and asked me what was really going on. I tried to explain. I tried to tell her that yes, I have memory problems. Yes, I get confused sometimes. Yes, there are moments when I do not feel like myself. But I also told her that I was still here. I was still present. I was still aware. And I was starting to feel like your father is hiding something from me. Jennifer's face went pale. She said, "What do you mean hiding something?" And I told her. I told her about the bank accounts, the investments, the way he would not let me see any financial information, the way he talked about me to other people like I was already dead. Jennifer promised she would look into it. She promised she would help me figure out what was going on. But before Jennifer could do anything, Richard filed for divorce. He actually filed for divorce from his wife of 43 years, who had just been diagnosed with a devastating disease. The papers were delivered to me on a Wednesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table eating toast when the doorbell rang. A man I did not know handed me an envelope and said, "You have been served." I opened it with trembling hands and read words that made me feel physically sick. Irreconcilable differences, division of assets, spousal support. Richard was taking me to court. Richard was trying to leave me with nothing. When I confronted him, he did not even have the decency to look ashamed. He said, "Look, this is not working anymore. You are sick. You need more care than I can provide. I think it is better if we go our separate ways." I stared at him in disbelief. "Separate ways?" I said. "Richard, I have Alzheimer's. I need support. I need help. I need my family. And you are divorcing me?" He shrugged. Actually shrugged. Like our entire life together meant nothing. He said, "You will be fine. You will go into a care facility. The state will take care of you. I am not going to spend the rest of my life being a caretaker. I deserve to be happy." That is when I realized this was never about him being overwhelmed. This was never about him not being able to handle my illness. This was about money. This was about him getting everything we had built together while I was vulnerable and sick. and supposedly incapable of fighting back. He thought my Alzheimer's made him untouchable. He thought I would just sign whatever papers he put in front of me. He thought I would not understand what was happening. He thought he could exploit my condition and walk away rich while I ended up in some state-run facility with nothing. But here is what Richard did not know. Here is what he underestimated completely. Just because I have Alzheimer's does not mean I am stupid. Just because I forget things does not mean I cannot see what is right in front of me. Just because I have bad days does not mean I do not have good days too. And on my good days, I am sharp. I am present. I am fully capable of understanding exactly what is being done to me. So I started keeping notes, detailed notes. Every time Richard said something suspicious, I wrote it down. Every time he moved money, I made a record of it. Every time he told someone I was incompetent, I documented it. I kept everything in a journal that I hid in a place he would never think to look. Inside the piano bench, under old sheet music that no one had touched in years. On my bad days, I would read through the journal to remind myself what was happening. On my good days, I would add to it. I became a detective in my own life, gathering evidence against the man who was supposed to love me until death do us part. I also did something else. Something Richard definitely did not expect. I hired a lawyer, a good one. Her name was Margaret Chen, and she specialized in elder abuse cases. My daughter Jennifer helped me find her and drove me to the first appointment. I walked into Margaret's office with my journal, my medical records, and a determination that surprised even me. I told her everything. Margaret listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions. When I finished, she looked at me with respect in her eyes and said, "Mrs. Patterson, what your husband is doing is called financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. It is illegal, and we are going to stop him." Margaret explained that just because I have Alzheimer's does not mean I lack capacity to make decisions. She said capacity is not all or nothing. She said I could have capacity to understand some things and not others. She said I could have capacity on good days even if I did not have it on bad days. She said what mattered was whether I understood what was happening right now, in this moment, with this decision. And I did. I absolutely did. I understood that my husband was stealing from me. I understood that he was trying to abandon me. I understood that I needed to fight back. The divorce proceedings began and Richard was confident. Too confident. I could see it in the way he walked into the courthouse, in the way he smiled at his lawyer, in the way he barely glanced at me sitting across the aisle. He thought this was going to be easy. He thought the judge would take one look at my diagnosis, declare me incompetent, and give him everything he wanted. He had even brought a neurologist, someone he had paid to evaluate me, someone who wrote a report saying I was severely impaired and could not manage my own affairs. Richard's lawyer stood up during the preliminary hearings and painted a picture of me as a tragic figure, a woman who sadly no longer understood reality, a woman who needed to be in professional care, a woman whose husband had nobly tried to care for her but could no longer handle the burden. It made me furious. It made my blood boil. But Margaret told me to stay calm. She told me to trust the process. She told me she had a plan. The actual divorce trial was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. I remember the date exactly, March 14th. The courthouse was old and imposing with high ceilings and dark wood everywhere. I sat at the table next to Margaret, my hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my breathing steady. Richard sat across from us with his lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit named David Hendricks. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Barbara Thornton. She had steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Richard's lawyer went first. He presented the neurologist's report. He presented financial documents showing that Richard had been solely managing our assets for the past 2 years. He presented testimony from Richard himself, who took the stand and described in painful detail how my Alzheimer's had progressed, how I could not remember conversations, how I got confused easily, how I sometimes did not even recognize him anymore. He said it with such false sadness, such fake compassion, that I wanted to scream. He talked about how difficult it had been for him, how much he had sacrificed, how he just wanted to make sure I was properly cared for while also being able to move on with his own life. When his lawyer asked him about the division of assets, Richard said he thought it was fair that he keep the majority since he had been the primary earner and since I would be going into a facility anyway where my needs would be covered by Medicaid. Then it was our turn. Margaret stood up and she was magnificent. She called me to the stand first. I walked up slowly, carefully, aware that everyone was watching me. judging me, wondering if I was really as impaired as Richard claimed. Margaret started with simple questions. What is your name? Where are you right now? What year is it? I answered each one clearly and correctly. Then she asked harder questions. Can you explain why you are here today? Can you tell the court about your marriage? Can you describe what has happened over the past 2 years? And I could. On that day, on that crucial day, my mind was clear. I told the judge everything. I told her about overhearing Richard on the phone. I told her about how he had systematically taken control of all our assets. I told her about how he had isolated me and made me feel like I was losing my mind even faster than I actually was. I told her about the journal I had kept, documenting everything. Margaret entered the journal into evidence, and the judge took her time reading through it, her expression growing darker with each page. But here is where it gets interesting. Here is where my story takes a turn that even I did not fully anticipate. Remember how I said I had kept that journal hidden in the piano bench? Well, that was not the only thing I had hidden, because you see, I might have Alzheimer's, but I am not naive. I grew up in a generation where women often had to protect themselves in ways that were not always obvious or straightforward. My mother taught me something when I was young. She said, always have insurance. Always have something that protects you if everything goes wrong. I did not fully understand what she meant until much later in life, until my marriage started to crumble, until I realized the man I trusted most in the world might betray me. So years ago, long before my diagnosis, I did something. I bought a life insurance policy on myself, but I did not tell Richard about it. I kept it separate, private, something that was just mine. The beneficiary was my children, split equally between the 3 of them. It was not a huge policy, but it was substantial, about $500,000. I paid the premiums out of a small inheritance I had received from my aunt, money that Richard did not know about because it came to me separately, and I deposited it in an account I opened before we were married, an account I kept active all these years, with just enough money coming in from odd jobs and gifts to keep it going. Was I hiding money from my husband? I suppose I was. But something in me, some instinct I could not even name at the time, told me to keep this separate, told me I might need it someday. But that was not the insurance I am talking about. That was not the envelope the judge read. The real insurance, the thing that changed everything, came about 6 months before Richard filed for divorce. It was during a time when I was having more bad days than good days. Richard had started being even more obvious about his plans. He would talk on the phone in front of me, right in front of me, like I was not even there, or like I would not understand or remember what he was saying. He was talking to someone. I later learned it was a woman named Patricia, who worked at his bank, and he was making plans. He was talking about what he would do once the divorce was final. He was talking about trips they would take. He was talking about how he was going to get the house, the savings, the retirement accounts, everything. He said, and I quote, "Once I get rid of the burden, we can finally be together. We can finally start our real life." I was sitting in the living room when he said this. He thought I was napping. He thought I was not paying attention, but I was, and I heard every single word. That evening, when Richard went out for one of his supposed business dinners that I now knew were dates with Patricia, I did something I had never done before. I went through his office. I went through his computer. I went through his files, and I found everything. Emails between Richard and Patricia going back 3 years. Messages talking about how they were in love. Messages talking about how he was just waiting for the right time to leave me. Messages talking about my diagnosis and how it was actually perfect timing because he could use it to his advantage in the divorce. He wrote in one email, "My lawyer says with her condition, no judge will side with her. I will get everything, and she will end up in state care. Then we can be together without any financial worries." I printed everything, every single email, every single text message I could find, every single piece of evidence that showed Richard had been planning this for years and was specifically using my Alzheimer's diagnosis to exploit me. I put it all in an envelope, a large manila envelope. I sealed it and I wrote on the outside, "To be opened in court." And then I gave it to Margaret during one of our meetings. I told her, "If things are not going well, if it looks like Richard is going to win, open this, use this." Margaret looked at the envelope, looked at me, and nodded. She said, "Mrs. Patterson, you are a lot smarter than your husband gives you credit for." So there we were in the courtroom. Richard had presented his case. I had given my testimony. The judge had read my journal, but I could tell she was still uncertain. She was still weighing everything. She was still trying to decide if I truly had the capacity to manage my own affairs, or if Richard's neurologist was right and I needed a guardian. Richard's lawyer was making his closing arguments, talking about how sad this whole situation was, how Mr. Patterson had tried his best, how he deserved to move forward with his life while ensuring his wife was cared for in an appropriate facility. I saw Richard actually wiping fake tears from his eyes. The performance was sickening. That is when Margaret stood up. She said, "Your Honor, before you make your decision, there is one more piece of evidence I would like to enter." She held up the envelope I had prepared months ago, the envelope that contained the truth about who Richard Patterson really was. Margaret said, "Mrs. Patterson asked me to keep this sealed unless it became absolutely necessary. I believe it is now necessary." The judge nodded and said, "Approach." Margaret walked to the bench and handed the envelope to Judge Thornton. The judge opened it carefully and began reading. And as she read, I watched her face change. I watched her eyes widen. I watched her mouth tighten into a thin line. I watched her look up at Richard with an expression of pure disgust. Judge Thornton said, "Mr. Patterson, please stand." Richard stood up, looking confused. The judge said, "I have just read approximately 60 pages of emails and text messages between you and a woman named Patricia Reeves. In these communications, you discuss your extramarital affair that has been ongoing for at least 3 years. You discuss your plans to divorce your wife specifically after her Alzheimer's diagnosis because you believe it will make it easier for you to gain full control of your marital assets. You discuss strategies for making your wife appear more incompetent than she actually is. You discuss how you convinced her to sign power of attorney and then immediately moved assets into accounts she could not access. You discuss how you plan to have her declared incompetent and placed in a minimal care facility funded by Medicaid while you keep all the money you made together during your 43-year marriage. Is this accurate?" Richard's face went white. His lawyer jumped up and started objecting, talking about how this evidence was obtained, questioning whether it was admissible, but Judge Thornton held up her hand. She said, "Counsel, these emails were sent from Mr. Patterson's personal email account. There is no expectation of privacy when you leave your computer unlocked in your own home where your wife lives. Mrs. Patterson had every right to access a shared computer. This evidence is absolutely admissible. Now, Mr. Patterson, I will ask you again, is this accurate?" Richard looked like he wanted to disappear. He looked at his lawyer, who was frantically whispering to him. Finally, he said, "I can explain." And Judge Thornton said, "I do not want your explanations. I want a yes or no answer. Did you write these emails? Did you have this affair? Did you plan to exploit your wife's medical condition for financial gain?" Richard opened his mouth, closed it, and then very quietly said, "Yes." The courtroom was silent, absolutely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Judge Thornton said, "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen a lot of despicable behavior. But what you have done, Mr. Patterson, ranks among the worst. You have engaged in elder abuse. You have engaged in financial exploitation. You have violated your fiduciary duty as someone holding power of attorney. You have committed adultery and then attempted to use your wife's illness to cover your tracks and steal from her. This is unconscionable." She turned to me. She said, "Mrs. Patterson, I have watched you very carefully today. I have listened to your testimony. I have read your journal. I have evaluated your capacity to understand these proceedings. And while I have no doubt that you suffer from Alzheimer's disease and that it presents real challenges in your life, I also have no doubt that you are substantially more competent than your husband would like this court to believe. You have demonstrated clear understanding of your situation. You have demonstrated the ability to protect your own interests. You have demonstrated remarkable foresight and intelligence in gathering evidence. Frankly, you have demonstrated more competence than many people without any cognitive impairment who come through my courtroom." She actually smiled at me when she said that last part. Then she turned back to Richard. She said, "Here is what is going to happen. First, the power of attorney Mrs. Patterson signed is hereby revoked. You no longer have any legal authority over her affairs. Second, all assets that you moved into accounts under your sole name will be immediately returned to joint accounts or divided equitably. Third, Mrs. Patterson will receive 70% of all marital assets as compensation for your financial exploitation and as recognition that she contributed equally to this marriage for over 4 decades. you will receive 30%. Fourth, you will pay spousal support in the amount of $5,000 per month until such time as Mrs. Patterson no longer requires it. Fifth, the marital home goes entirely to Mrs. Patterson. You will vacate within 30 days. Sixth, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for possible criminal charges related to elder abuse and financial exploitation. And seventh, I am ordering you to pay all of Mrs. Patterson's legal fees. The look on Richard's face was something I will never forget. Shock, horror, disbelief. His lawyer was trying to object, but Judge Thornton shut him down. She said, "You can appeal if you want, counsel, but I promise you no appeals court is going to overturn this decision once they see the evidence. Your client is lucky I cannot throw him in jail right now. This court is adjourned." And she banged her gavel. I sat there in stunned silence. Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand. She said, "You did it. We did it." My children, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, rushed forward and hugged me. Sarah was crying. Jennifer was crying. Even Michael, who never cries, had tears in his eyes. They said, "Mom, you were amazing. You were so strong. We are so proud of you." And I started crying too. Not sad tears, not scared tears, but tears of relief, tears of vindication, tears of knowing that I had fought back and won. Richard left the courtroom without looking at me. He left with his lawyer, and I later learned that Patricia broke up with him within a week, once she realized he was not going to be rich after all. He ended up moving into a small apartment on the other side of town. He ended up paying me that spousal support every month, though he is always late, and we have had to go back to court twice to enforce it. He ended up being investigated by the district attorney, though ultimately they decided not to press criminal charges because they said it would be too difficult to prove intent beyond a reasonable doubt. But honestly, I did not care about criminal charges. I cared about justice, and I got it. Now, I know some of you watching this might be going through something similar. You might have a family member with Alzheimer's or dementia, or another condition that affects memory. You might be watching someone you love be taken advantage of. You might feel helpless. You might feel like there is nothing you can do. But I want you to understand something. Please really hear me on this. Having Alzheimer's does not mean the person you love is gone. It does not mean they are not still in there, still aware, still deserving of respect and protection and dignity. And if you suspect someone is being exploited, if you suspect someone is being taken advantage of, you have to act. You have to speak up. You have to fight for them. If you have experienced something like this, if you or someone you love has been exploited because of a medical condition, I want you to leave a comment right now. Just write, "I will fight for dignity." That is all. Just those 4 words. I will fight for dignity. Because when we share our stories, when we let each other know we are not alone, we create something powerful. We create a community of people who refuse to let the vulnerable be victimized. We create a movement of people who understand that every person, no matter their cognitive state, deserves respect. Your comment might be exactly what someone else needs to see today to give them courage. So please, take a moment and write, "I will fight for dignity." Let us build that community together right here, right now. After the trial, my life changed in ways I never expected. I stayed in the house where I had raised my children, the house that held 43 years of memories. My children helped me set up systems to manage my daily life. We hired a part-time caregiver named Linda, who comes every morning to help me with tasks that have become difficult. We set up reminders on my phone for medications and appointments. We created a routine that helps me feel grounded even on the days when my memory is particularly bad. I am not going to lie and say everything is perfect. Alzheimer's is still Alzheimer's. I still have days when I wake up confused. I still have moments when I cannot remember something important. I still have times when I look at a familiar object and cannot remember what it is called or what it is for. But here is what is different now. I am not being told I am incompetent. I am not being told I am a burden. I am not being made to feel like my life is over just because my brain is not working the way it used to. My children treat me with respect. They ask my opinion. They include me in decisions. They understand that I might need extra time to process information, that I might need things repeated, that I might need help remembering details, but they never treat me like I am stupid or worthless. And that makes all the difference. That makes life worth living, even with this terrible disease. I also started doing something I never thought I would do. I started advocating. I joined a support group for people with Alzheimer's and dementia, and I started sharing my story. I started talking about what Richard did to me and how I fought back. and you would be surprised how many people told me they had experienced something similar or knew someone who had. Financial exploitation of people with cognitive impairment is shockingly common. Family members, caretakers, even strangers see someone who is vulnerable and they see an opportunity. They forge signatures. They manipulate the person into signing documents they do not understand. They isolate them from other family members who might protect them. They convince them that they are more impaired than they actually are. It is insidious, and it is everywhere. So I started speaking up. I contacted local news stations and told them my story. One station did a whole segment about elder abuse and financial exploitation, and they interviewed me. I was nervous about going public, worried about what people would think, worried about exposing such a painful private experience. But the response was overwhelming. People reached out to thank me. People said my story gave them courage to investigate what was happening to their own loved ones. People said they had suspected abuse but did not know how to prove it, and my story showed them it was possible. I also worked with Margaret to create a guide for people with cognitive impairment and their families. We called it Protecting Yourself, a guide for people with Alzheimer's and dementia. In it, we outlined practical steps people could take to protect themselves before, during, and after a diagnosis. Things like setting up a durable power of attorney with multiple people to provide checks and balances. Things like keeping separate bank accounts if possible. Things like documenting everything, just like I did with my journal. Things like knowing the warning signs of financial exploitation. Things like understanding that having a cognitive impairment does not automatically mean you lack capacity to make decisions. We distributed this guide through support groups, senior centers, medical offices, anywhere we thought it might help someone. Looking back now, I realize that what Richard did to me, as painful as it was, ended up giving me a purpose. It ended up showing me that I still had something to contribute. It ended up proving that my life was not over just because I have Alzheimer's. In a strange way, his betrayal became my catalyst for helping others. His attempt to exploit me became the reason I now work to prevent others from being exploited. There is something poetic about that. Something that feels like justice beyond what the court could ever provide. But I also want to be honest about something else. Something I have not told many people because it feels complicated and messy and hard to explain. Part of me still misses Richard, not the Richard who betrayed me, not the Richard who tried to steal from me, but the Richard I thought I knew for 40 years, the Richard who held my hand at our wedding, the Richard who stayed up all night with me when our babies were sick, the Richard who danced with me in the kitchen on our 20th anniversary. I know now that maybe that Richard never existed, or maybe he changed, or maybe I just saw what I wanted to see, but that does not make the loss any less real. Divorce after 43 years, even when it is absolutely necessary, even when the other person has done terrible things, is still a kind of death. It is still grief. It is still the end of a story you thought would have a different ending. I also sometimes wonder if things would have been different if I had not gotten sick. Would Richard have stayed? Would he have remained faithful? Would he have still been the partner I thought he was? Or was this always in him, this capacity for cruelty, just waiting for the right circumstances to emerge? I will never know the answer to those questions. And honestly, I have come to accept that maybe the answers do not matter. What matters is what actually happened. What matters is how I responded. What matters is that I did not let him destroy me. My children ask me sometimes if I regret marrying their father. It is a hard question, because how can I regret a marriage that gave me my 3 beautiful children? How can I regret 40 years that included so many good memories along with the bad? I tell them what I tell myself. I do not regret the past. I regret the way it ended. I regret that the man I loved chose greed over loyalty. I regret that he saw my vulnerability as an opportunity instead of a reason to protect me more fiercely. But I do not regret my life. I do not regret fighting back, and I do not regret surviving. There is something else I need to tell you. Something that brings this whole story full circle in a way that still makes me shake my head in disbelief. Remember that life insurance policy I mentioned? The one I had kept secret, the one that was separate from everything else. Well, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a letter from the insurance company. Apparently, years ago when I first took out the policy, I had also purchased something called a living benefits rider. It was an optional add-on that I do not even remember selecting, but there it was in the documents. This rider meant that if I was diagnosed with certain qualifying conditions, including Alzheimer's disease, I could access a portion of the death benefit while I was still alive. It was designed exactly for situations like mine, where someone has a terminal or chronic degenerative illness and needs financial resources for care. I contacted the insurance company, and sure enough, I qualified. They paid out $250,000 directly to me, money that was mine, that Richard knew nothing about, that gave me an additional financial cushion beyond what the court had awarded me. When my children found out, Jennifer laughed until she cried. She said, "Mom, you are like a secret agent. You have been protecting yourself all along and did not even know it." And maybe she was right. Maybe some part of me, even years ago before any of this happened, knew to protect myself, knew to keep something separate, knew to plan for the worst even while hoping for the best. I used some of that money to make modifications to my house so I can stay here safely as my condition progresses. Grab bars in the bathroom, better lighting, a medical alert system. I used some of it to pay for Linda, my caregiver, so I do not have to rely entirely on my children. I put some in a trust for my grandchildren's education, and I donated some to organizations that work on Alzheimer's research and advocacy. Because if my story, if my experience, if even my money can help find a cure or help protect someone else, then something good will have come from all this pain. I want to tell you what life looks like for me now, 3 years after that courtroom drama, because I think it is important to understand that life goes on. Alzheimer's goes on too. My condition has progressed. There are more bad days now than there used to be. There are times when I do not recognize where I am. There are times when I look at my daughter and call her by the wrong name and see the hurt flash across her face before she gently corrects me. There are times when I feel like I am disappearing, like the person I was is slipping away and someone else is taking her place, someone confused and frightened and lost. But there are also still good days, days when my mind is clear and I can have real conversations with my children, days when I can work in my garden and remember the names of all my flowers, days when I can look through old photo albums and the memories come flooding back sharp and vivid, days when I feel like myself, like the woman who fought back against her husband and won, like the woman who refused to be erased. On those days, I feel strong, I feel capable, I feel proud of what I did and who I am. I keep my journal still. I write in it when I can, documenting my days, my thoughts, my feelings. I write about my children's visits. I write about things I want to remember. I write letters to my future self for the days when I might not remember who I am or what I have accomplished. Dear Eleanor, I write, you are a fighter. You are brave. You stood up for yourself when everyone expected you to just fade away quietly. You protected not just yourself, but countless others with your advocacy. Your life matters. You matter. I do not know if I will remember to read these letters when the time comes, but I write them anyway, just in case. My relationship with my children has deepened in ways I never expected. Tragedy and hardship either pull families apart or bring them closer together, and thankfully for us, it was the latter. Sarah calls me every single day. Jennifer comes to visit twice a week. Michael, who lives farther away, video calls every Sunday and visits once a month. They coordinate with each other to make sure I am never alone for too long. They include me in family events. They bring my grandchildren to see me, and those little faces light up my world even on the darkest days. My grandson Tommy, who is 6 years old, told me recently that I am his favorite person in the whole world. He does not care that I sometimes forget his name. He does not care that I ask him the same questions over and over. He just loves me for me, and that is a gift beyond measure. I have also found an unexpected community in my support group. There are 12 of us who meet every Wednesday afternoon. All of us have either Alzheimer's or some form of dementia. All of us are in different stages. All of us understand what the others are going through in ways that people without this disease simply cannot. We share our struggles. We share our victories. We share our fears about the future. We laugh together, often at ourselves, at the absurd situations we find ourselves in. Last week, Patricia, not my Richard's Patricia, but a different Patricia in our group, told us she put her car keys in the refrigerator and spent 2 hours looking for them before her husband found them next to the milk. We all laughed until we cried because every single one of us has done something similar. But we also talk about serious things. We talk about how people treat us differently now, how they talk to us like we are children, how they make decisions for us without asking our input, how they assume we cannot understand or think or have valid opinions. And we remind each other that we are still here, we are still people, we still have value, we still deserve dignity and respect. That Wednesday afternoon meeting has become sacred to me. It is the one time each week when I am with people who truly understand, where I do not have to explain or justify or prove myself. I can just be Eleanor, a woman with Alzheimer's, and that is enough. Now let me tell you about something that happened just last month. I got a letter in the mail from a woman named Christine. She had seen the news segment about my story. She wrote to tell me that her mother was going through something similar. Her stepfather was trying to have her mother declared incompetent so he could take control of all her assets. Christine's mother had dementia, but was still substantially aware and present. Christine did not know what to do or how to help until she saw my story. She contacted an elder law attorney. She helped her mother document what was happening, and they went to court, and they won. Christine's mother kept her home and her independence. The stepfather's petition was denied, and Christine wrote to thank me. She said, "Your courage gave my mother courage. Your story saved her life." I cried when I read that letter. I cried because it meant that what I went through, all that pain and fear and fighting, had actually helped someone, had actually prevented another person from being victimized, had actually made a difference. I have that letter framed now, hanging on my wall where I can see it every day. On the days when I feel like my life is slipping away, when I feel like Alzheimer's is winning, I look at that letter, and I remember that my life has meant something, that I have contributed something, that I have made the world a tiny bit better. You know what the cruelest part of Alzheimer's is? It is not the memory loss, though that is hard. It is not the confusion, though that is frightening. It is the way society treats you once you have this diagnosis. You become invisible. You become diminished. People talk about you like you are not in the room. People make decisions for you without consulting you. People write you off as already gone even when you are still very much here. That is what Richard did to me. He saw my diagnosis, and he saw an opportunity to erase me, to take what was mine, to move on with his life as if our 43 years together meant nothing. And I think that is what I am most proud of in this whole ordeal. Not that I kept my money, though that certainly helped. Not that I won in court, though that was validating, but that I refused to be erased. I refused to be invisible. I refused to let my diagnosis define my worth. If you are watching this and you have Alzheimer's or dementia, please hear me. You are still here. You still matter. You still have value. You still deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Do not let anyone make you feel like your life is over just because your brain is not working the way it used to. You are more than your diagnosis. You are more than your symptoms. You are a complete human being with a lifetime of experiences and wisdom and love to share. Fight for yourself. Protect yourself. Document everything. Ask for help when you need it. And never, ever let anyone make you feel like you do not deserve to advocate for your own interests. And if you are watching this, and you have a loved one with cognitive impairment, please treat them with the respect they deserve. Include them in conversations and decisions. Ask their opinion. Listen to what they have to say. Understand that they might need extra time or help, but that does not mean they have nothing to contribute. Protect them from those who would exploit them. Be vigilant. Watch for warning signs of financial abuse or manipulation. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Do not assume that just because someone has dementia, they are incapable of understanding their own situation. Capacity exists on a spectrum, and people can have good days and bad days. Treat your loved one as the valuable, important person they are, because they are still in there, still present, still deserving of your love and protection. Before I finish, I want to tell you one more thing. Something I have learned through all of this. Something that feels important to share. Life is unpredictable. You can do everything right, make all the right choices, be a good person, and still end up facing unimaginable hardship. I did not choose to get Alzheimer's. I did not choose to have my husband betray me. I did not choose any of this, but I did choose how to respond. I chose to fight. I chose to protect myself. I chose to turn my pain into purpose. And that made all the difference. We do not always get to control what happens to us, but we always get to control how we respond. That is our power. That is our agency. That is what no disease, no betrayal, no hardship can ever take away from us unless we let it. Richard thought my Alzheimer's made him rich. He thought it made me weak and exploitable and easy to discard, but he was wrong. My Alzheimer's did not make him rich. My Alzheimer's did not make me weak. If anything, my Alzheimer's revealed his true character and revealed my own strength. It showed me what I was capable of. It showed me that I could fight back even when the odds were stacked against me. It showed me that I was so much more than my diagnosis. And that envelope the judge read that changed everything. That was not just evidence of Richard's wrongdoing. That was proof of my competence. That was proof that I could think strategically, plan ahead, protect myself. That was proof that having Alzheimer's does not mean you lose your intelligence or your awareness or your ability to advocate for yourself. That envelope saved me. But more than that, it proved me. It proved to the court, to my children, to Richard, and most importantly to myself that I was still here, still capable, still fighting. So if you have made it this far in my story, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being part of this community of people who believe that everyone deserves dignity and respect regardless of their cognitive state. I hope my story has helped you in some way. I hope it has given you courage if you are facing something similar. I hope it has inspired you to protect yourself or a loved one. I hope it has reminded you that people with Alzheimer's and dementia are still people, still valuable, still here. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe in fighting for dignity and protecting the vulnerable, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe to this channel. We share stories like mine here, stories of resilience and courage and people who refuse to give up. We build a community of support and understanding. We create a space where people with cognitive impairment and their families can find hope and practical help. By subscribing, you become part of that community. You help these stories reach more people who need to hear them. You help build a movement of people who understand that every life has value no matter what challenges we face. So please, click that subscribe button. Join us. Be part of this mission to protect and advocate for those who are most vulnerable. I am Eleanor Patterson. I am 71 years old. I have Alzheimer's disease, and I am still here. I am still fighting. I am still living my life on my own terms. My husband thought my illness would make him rich, but instead it made me stronger. The judge read that envelope and everything changed. Justice was served, and I got to keep not just my assets, but my dignity, my independence, and my sense of self. That is worth more than any amount of money. That is worth everything. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, if you or someone you love has experienced exploitation because of a medical condition, leave a comment saying, "I will fight for dignity." Let us support each other. Let us build this community together. And please subscribe so you do not miss the other stories we share here. Stories of hope, courage, and people who refuse to be defined by their limitations. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Remember, you matter. Your story matters. And you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect every single day of your life. I want to share more with you because I think these details matter. I think they show the full picture of what life with Alzheimer's really looks like and what fighting back against exploitation really means. After the trial, after the victory, after the initial relief wore off, I had to face the reality of building a new life. A life without Richard. A life as a divorced woman in my 70s with a progressive degenerative disease. Some days that reality felt overwhelming. Some days I wondered if maybe Richard had been right, if maybe I really could not handle things on my own, if maybe I had won the battle but was about to lose the war. Those first few months after he moved out were the hardest. The house felt empty in a way it never had before. Even when Richard and I were barely speaking, even when I knew he was betraying me, his presence had filled the space. Now there was just silence. Just me and my failing memory and the ghosts of 43 years of marriage haunting every room. I would wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and forget that he was gone. I would reach across the bed expecting to find him there, and my hand would meet cold, empty sheets. Then the memories would come flooding back. The phone call, the divorce papers, the courtroom, the envelope. And I would lie there in the dark, wondering how my life had come to this. But my children would not let me sink into despair. Sarah started coming over every morning for coffee. She would sit at the kitchen table with me, and we would talk about everything and nothing. She told me about her job, her husband, her kids. She asked me about my day, my plans, my feelings. She treated me like a person, like her mother, not like a patient or a problem to be managed. Those morning coffee sessions became my anchor. They gave me a reason to get up, to get dressed, to face the day. Jennifer did something similar. She declared that Tuesdays and Thursdays were our days. She would come over after work and we would cook dinner together. She would patiently help me when I forgot what ingredient came next or what temperature the oven should be. She would gently redirect me when I started to tell the same story I had just told 5 minutes ago. She never made me feel stupid or burdensome. She just loved me through it. Michael, my son, approached things differently. He is more practical, more solution-oriented. He helped me set up systems to manage my condition. He bought me a smartphone with a simple interface and programmed it with reminders for everything. Medications at 8 in the morning and 8 at night. Drink water every 2 hours. Lunch at noon. Dinner at 6. Check the door locks before bed. He set up cameras in the house, not to spy on me, but so that if I got confused or lost, someone could check on me remotely. He created a binder with all my important information, medical records, financial documents, emergency contacts, instructions for various scenarios. He laminated cards with my name, address, and emergency contact information, and put them in my purse, my wallet, my jacket pockets. He was trying to build a safety net for me, trying to make sure that even on my worst days, I would be okay. Linda, my caregiver, became more than just hired help. She became a friend. She would arrive every morning at 9 o'clock sharp, always with a smile, always with patience. She helped me shower and dress, tasks that had become difficult and sometimes frightening for me. She prepared my breakfast and made sure I took my medications. She helped me organize my day, reminding me of appointments and commitments, but she also talked to me, really talked to me. She told me about her own life, her grown children, her grandchildren, her dreams of traveling someday. She asked my advice on things, genuinely wanting my input. She made me feel valuable, like I still had wisdom to share despite my failing memory. One day, about 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I had a particularly bad episode. I woke up in the morning and did not know where I was. I did not recognize my own bedroom. I panicked. I started crying and calling out for my mother, who has been dead for 25 years. Linda found me curled up in the corner of my room, terrified and disoriented. She did not panic. She did not treat me like I was crazy. She just sat down on the floor next to me, took my hand, and started talking in a soft, calm voice. She told me where I was, who I was, what year it was. She reminded me about my children, my grandchildren, my life. Slowly, gradually, the fog lifted. Reality came back into focus. I felt embarrassed and ashamed. I apologized over and over, but Linda just hugged me and said, "Eleanor, you have nothing to apologize for. This is your disease, not your fault. You are doing so well. You are so strong." I cried in her arms like a child. That episode scared me. It showed me how bad things could get, how much worse they would eventually become. I started thinking about the future in ways I had been avoiding. What happens when I cannot live alone anymore? What happens when I do not recognize my own children? What happens when I forget who I am completely? These questions haunted me. I talked to my children about them. We had hard conversations about care options, about my wishes for end-of-life care, about what I wanted and did not want. I made my preferences clear. I did not want to be in a facility if it could be avoided. I wanted to stay in my home as long as possible. I wanted to be surrounded by people who loved me, not strangers. I wanted to maintain my dignity even as my mind deteriorated. My children promised they would honor my wishes. They promised they would take care of me. They promised I would never be abandoned the way Richard had tried to abandon me. I also started attending that support group I mentioned. The first time I went, I was terrified. I did not want to be around other people with Alzheimer's and dementia. I did not want to see my future reflected in their faces. I did not want to admit that I was one of them, that I belonged in a group for people with cognitive impairment. But Jennifer convinced me to try it, just once. She drove me to the community center where the group met. We walked into a bright room with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. There were about 15 people there, all different ages, all in different stages of their disease. The facilitator, a kind woman named Dr. Rebecca Martinez, welcomed me warmly. She explained that this was a safe space where people could share their experiences, their fears, their victories, without judgment. At first, I just listened. Other people talked about their symptoms, their struggles, their frustrations. They talked about forgetting their grandchildren's names, getting lost in their own neighborhoods, putting things in strange places and not remembering why. having conversations they could not recall 5 minutes later, being treated like children by family members and medical professionals, feeling like they were disappearing, becoming invisible, losing themselves piece by piece. I heard my own experience reflected in every story. I realized I was not alone. I was not the only one going through this. There was an entire community of people who understood exactly what I was feeling. The second time I attended, I spoke up. I told my story, not the whole thing, not the details about Richard and the divorce, but just the basics. I have Alzheimer's. I get confused sometimes. I forget things. I struggle with daily tasks that used to be automatic, and I am scared about what comes next. The group listened with compassion and understanding. They did not offer empty platitudes or false hope. They just acknowledged my fear and told me I was brave for being there, for speaking up, for facing my reality. After the meeting, several people came up to me. They thanked me for sharing. They told me their own stories. They invited me to sit with them at the next meeting. I felt accepted. I felt like I belonged somewhere. Over the following weeks and months, that support group became essential to my well-being. I looked forward to those Wednesday afternoon meetings. I got to know the other members. There was Robert, a 78-year-old retired professor who had early-onset Alzheimer's and was determined to finish writing his memoir before he forgot everything. There was Patricia, who I mentioned earlier, a 65-year-old grandmother who kept a detailed journal just like I did to help her remember her days. There was James, an 82-year-old widower whose wife had died 2 years ago and who was now facing his diagnosis alone. There was Maria, a 70-year-old immigrant who struggled not only with dementia, but also with language barriers that made everything more complicated. There was Thomas, a 69-year-old veteran who had both PTSD and dementia, and who was fighting battles on multiple fronts. We supported each other. We celebrated small victories together. When Robert finished a chapter of his memoir, we cheered. When Patricia remembered her grandson's birthday without being reminded, we applauded. When James made it through a whole meeting without getting confused about where he was, we congratulated him. We also mourned losses together. When Maria stopped coming because she had to move into a care facility, we cried. When Thomas had a stroke and never returned, we held a moment of silence for him. We were a family of sorts, bonded by our shared experience of losing ourselves. It was in that support group that I first shared the full story of what Richard had done to me and how I had fought back. Dr. Martinez had been encouraging me to share more, sensing that I was holding something back. One day, about 6 months into attending the group, I finally felt ready. I told them everything: the phone call, the betrayal, the financial exploitation, the divorce, the journal, the envelope, the courtroom victory. When I finished, the room was silent. Then, one by one, people started speaking. They told me I was brave. They told me I had given them hope. They told me they had experienced similar situations or knew someone who had. They asked me for advice on how to protect themselves. That is when I realized I had a responsibility to share my story more widely. If people in my small support group were experiencing this, how many others were out there suffering in silence? How many elderly people with cognitive impairment were being exploited by family members, caregivers, or strangers? How many were being told they were incompetent when they still had capacity? How many were being robbed of their dignity along with their assets? I decided I needed to do more than just share in the support group. I needed to go public. That is when I contacted the local news station. I called their tip line and told them I had a story about elder abuse and financial exploitation. They were interested immediately. They sent a reporter and a camera crew to my house. I was nervous. I had never been on television before. I was worried about how I would come across, worried that I would forget what I wanted to say or get confused during the interview. But the reporter, a young woman named Ashley Chen, was patient and kind. She asked me gentle questions. She let me take my time answering. She made me feel comfortable. The segment aired 2 weeks later. It was 6 minutes long, which apparently is quite lengthy for a local news story. They showed footage of me in my home, talking about my diagnosis, about Richard's betrayal, about the courtroom battle. They interviewed Margaret, my lawyer, who explained the legal aspects of elder abuse and financial exploitation. They showed documents, with sensitive information redacted, proving what Richard had done. They ended with me looking directly at the camera and saying, "If you have Alzheimer's or dementia, you are not helpless. You still have rights. You can still fight back. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The news station received dozens of calls and emails. People thanked me for speaking out. People shared their own stories of exploitation. People asked for help and resources. The segment was shared on social media and went viral in our local community. I started receiving letters and messages from people I had never met. Some were thanking me. Some were asking for advice. Some were sharing their own experiences. I tried to respond to as many as I could, though there were days when I could not remember what I had already replied to or what someone had asked me. That is when Margaret and I decided to create the guide I mentioned earlier. We wanted to provide practical, actionable information that people could use to protect themselves. We spent months working on it. Margaret provided the legal expertise. I provided the lived experience. We consulted with doctors, social workers, financial advisors, and other experts. We interviewed other people with cognitive impairment who had experienced exploitation. We researched best practices and created a comprehensive resource. The guide covered everything: how to set up advance directives before you need them, how to choose someone trustworthy to have power of attorney, how to maintain some financial independence even after a diagnosis, how to recognize warning signs of exploitation, what to do if you suspect you or a loved one is being exploited, what legal resources are available, how to document evidence, how to find a good elder law attorney, how to navigate the court system, how to protect your dignity while acknowledging your limitations. We made it available for free. We distributed it through support groups, senior centers, hospitals, doctors' offices, anywhere we could think of. We also made it available online as a PDF that anyone could download. The feedback was incredible. People told us the guide had helped them protect themselves or a loved one. Lawyers told us they were recommending it to their clients. Social workers told us they were using it as a training resource. We heard stories of people who had successfully fought back against exploitation using the strategies we outlined. Each story felt like validation, like proof that my pain had served a purpose, that something good had come from Richard's betrayal. But I do not want to paint too rosy a picture. The truth is, advocacy work is exhausting, especially when you have Alzheimer's. There were days when I could not remember what I was supposed to be doing, days when I would sit down to work on something and forget what it was, days when I would read through the guide we had created and not remember writing it, days when I would receive a letter from someone thanking me and have no recollection of my story being on the news. Those days were frustrating and frightening. They reminded me that my disease was progressive, that I was getting worse, that eventually I would not be able to do this work anymore. My children worried about me. They thought I was taking on too much, stressing myself out, pushing too hard. Sarah especially would tell me, "Mom, you need to rest. You need to take care of yourself. You do not have to save everyone." And she was right, of course, but I could not stop. I felt like I had been given this platform, this opportunity, and I had to use it while I still could. I had to help as many people as possible before my mind deteriorated to the point where I could not help anyone anymore. It felt urgent. It felt like a race against time. Dr. Martinez, my support group facilitator, helped me find balance. She reminded me that taking care of myself was not selfish, it was necessary. She helped me set boundaries. She encouraged me to delegate tasks. She suggested I train other people to do the advocacy work, so it could continue even after I was no longer able. That was smart advice. I started working with a local nonprofit that focused on elder rights. I trained volunteers on how to recognize and report exploitation. I shared my story with social work students at the local university. I did what I could to plant seeds that would grow into continued advocacy even without me. Now, 3 years after that courtroom victory, I can feel myself declining. The bad days outnumber the good days now. I forget more than I remember. I get confused more easily. I need more help with daily tasks. Linda now comes twice a day instead of just in the mornings. My children have hired a night nurse to stay with me because I have started wandering at night, getting up and not knowing where I am or what I am doing. Last month, I left the house in my nightgown at 3 in the morning. A neighbor found me 2 blocks away, completely disoriented, and called my daughter. That was terrifying for everyone, especially me. I do not remember doing it. That is almost worse than remembering. The blank spaces in my memory are growing larger and more frequent. But here is what I want you to understand. Even now, even in this state, I am still here. I am still Eleanor. I still have moments of clarity. I still have thoughts and feelings and opinions. I still have dignity and deserve respect. When people talk to me like I am a child, I notice. When people make decisions for me without asking my input, I feel that. When people talk about me like I am not in the room, I am hurt by that. My brain may be failing, but my heart is still intact. My emotions are still real. My needs are still valid. I also want you to know that I do not regret fighting back against Richard. Even on my worst days, even when I am confused and scared and lost, some part of me remembers that I stood up for myself. Some part of me knows that I won. That knowledge, that memory, even when it is faint and fuzzy, gives me strength. It reminds me that I am more than my disease. I am a woman who fought for her dignity and won. That matters. That will always matter. My greatest fear now is not death. I have made peace with my mortality. My greatest fear is losing myself completely before I die, reaching a point where I do not recognize my children, where I do not remember my life, where the person I was is completely gone and only the disease remains. I fear becoming a burden on my family. I fear them having to care for someone who does not even know who they are. I fear the pain that will cause them, but they assure me, over and over, that they will never see me as a burden, that they will love me no matter what, that taking care of me is not a duty but a privilege. I hope they mean that. I hope they can hold on to that when things get really bad. I have started saying goodbye in small ways, not final goodbyes but gradual ones. I have written letters to each of my children and grandchildren to be opened after I am gone. I have recorded videos of myself on good days, talking about my life, sharing memories, giving advice, telling them how much I love them. I am creating a legacy, leaving pieces of myself behind for when the real me is no longer accessible. It is heartbreaking work, but also necessary. I want them to remember me as I really was, not just as the confused elderly woman I am becoming. Last week, my grandson Tommy came to visit. He is 7 now, growing so fast. He climbed into my lap and asked me, "Grandma, do you remember my name today?" It was such an honest, innocent question. I told him yes. Of course I remember. You are Tommy, and you are my sunshine. He smiled and hugged me tight. Then he said, "If you forget my name someday, that is okay. I will always remember yours." I started crying. This little boy, this beautiful child, understood more about Alzheimer's than most adults. He understood that forgetting is not a choice, not a failure, just a symptom. He understood that love persists even when memory fails. I held him and thought, this is what matters. This moment, this love, this connection. That is what I am fighting to preserve for as long as I can. So here I am, 3 years after that devastating phone call where I overheard Richard planning to destroy me. 3 years after the diagnosis that changed everything. 3 years after the courtroom battle that saved my life. I am still here, still fighting, still trying to make each day count, still trying to help others, still trying to hold on to myself for as long as possible. Richard thought my Alzheimer's would make him rich and make me disappear. He was wrong on both counts. I am still here, and my voice, my story, my advocacy continues to help people even as I fade. If you are still with me, if you have listened to this entire story, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for seeing me as a person, not just as a disease. Thank you for understanding that people with Alzheimer's still have value, still deserve dignity, still deserve to be heard. Please, if this story has touched you, share it. Tell others. Help spread awareness about elder abuse and exploitation. Help fight for the rights and dignity of people with cognitive impairment. Help build a world where people like me are protected, not preyed upon. And please, subscribe to this channel. Be part of our community. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can protect the vulnerable. Together, we can ensure that everyone, regardless of their cognitive state, is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. Leave that comment. I will fight for dignity. So we know we are not alone in this mission. So we know there is a community of people who care, who understand, who are willing to stand up and speak out. I am Eleanor Patterson. I have Alzheimer's disease, but I am so much more than my diagnosis. I am a mother, a grandmother, a fighter, an advocate, a survivor. Richard thought he could erase me. Instead, he revealed my strength. The judge read that envelope, and everything changed. Justice was served. And now I am using my voice, while I still have it, to help others. That is my legacy. That is what I want to be remembered for. Not the woman who forgot, but the woman who fought. Not the victim, but the victor. Not the disease, but the person behind it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Until we meet again, remember that every person has value, every voice deserves to be heard, and every life deserves dignity. Take care of yourselves and each other, and never stop fighting for what is right.